2013, 19-year-old college student Bryce Laspey's SUV was found crashed at the bottom of a steep embankment near Castaic Lake, California. The vehicle had plunged down a 25-foot drop. The windows were shattered. Blood was found inside, but Bryce was gone. Here's what makes this case so disturbing. In the 24 hours before that crash, Bryce had been driving in circles. Literally, he'd spent hours driving around the same 2-mile area, refusing to go home, acting so strangely that his own mother called police 3 separate times, begging them to check on him. Why would a college student with no history of mental illness suddenly start behaving erratically? Why did he drive in circles for hours before crashing? And how did he survive that crash and vanish so completely that a decade of searching has found nothing? This is the haunting mystery of Bryce Laspey, and nothing about it makes sense. The Bryce Laspey case is one of those disappearances that feels impossible. We know so much about what happened in the hours before he vanished. We have surveillance footage, we have phone records, we have GPS data, we have witness statements. And yet, despite all of this information, we have no idea where Bryce is or what happened to him after his SUV crashed on August 30th, 2013. This case has elements that seem contradictory. Bryce was clearly in some kind of crisis, but he was functional enough to drive for hours. His behavior suggested he didn't want to go home, but he also called his mother multiple times. The crash looked survivable, but Bryce vanished completely. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge Bryce's parents, Karen and Michael Laspey, who have never stopped searching for their son. If you have any information about Bryce's disappearance, please contact the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Now, let's go back to 2013, to a college student whose life seemed full of promise, whose personality suddenly changed, and whose disappearance would leave his family with a decade of unanswered questions. Bryce Michael Laspey was born on April 30th, 1994, in Springfield, Illinois. He was the only child of Karen and Michael Laspey, and by all accounts, he was a happy, well-adjusted kid. The Laspey family was close-knit. Karen and Michael were involved, loving parents. They weren't overbearing, but they maintained good communication with Bryce. He could talk to them about anything. Bryce grew up in a stable, middle-class home. He did well in school. Not a straight-A student, but solid grades, no serious problems. He had friends, played video games, enjoyed typical teenage activities. Those who knew Bryce described him as intelligent and articulate, creative with artistic interests, generally happy and easygoing, close to his parents, a bit introverted but socially capable, not someone prone to risky behavior. Bryce attended Naperville Central High School in Illinois. He was a good student who got along well with teachers and peers. He wasn't the most popular kid, but he wasn't an outcast either. He had his group of friends and was generally well-liked. He showed interest in graphic design and creative work. He spent time on the computer, enjoyed gaming, and was fairly typical for a millennial teenager in the late 2000s, early 2010s. There were no red flags, no behavioral issues, no substance abuse problems, no mental health diagnoses. Bryce was, by all measures, a normal, healthy teenager. In 2012, after graduating high school, Bryce decided to attend Sierra College in Rocklin, California. This was a community college about 2,000 miles from his parents' home in Illinois. The move to California was Bryce's idea. He wanted independence, wanted to experience life on the West Coast, wanted to pursue studies in a new place. Karen and Michael supported his decision, though it meant their only child would be far from home. Bryce moved to California in fall 2012 and enrolled at Sierra College. He planned to study graphic design and eventually transfer to a 4-year university. Bryce's first year at Sierra College went well. He maintained decent grades, made new friends, had a roommate he got along with, communicated regularly with his parents, seemed to be adjusting to college life. He lived in student housing and seemed to enjoy his independence. He'd call or text his parents regularly. Not every day, but enough that they felt connected and knew he was doing okay. Karen and Michael visited him a couple of times. Everything seemed fine. Bryce seemed happy. In summer 2013, Bryce stayed in California rather than returning home to Illinois. He took summer classes and worked part-time. His parents supported this decision. He was building a life in California, and that was okay. But then, in late August 2013, something changed. Looking back, Karen would later say there were subtle signs that summer that Bryce wasn't quite himself. He seemed more withdrawn in phone conversations. He wasn't as communicative as usual. When she asked if everything was okay, he'd say yes, but his tone was off. He seemed distracted or distant. But these were subtle changes. Nothing alarming. Nothing that made Karen think her son was in crisis. Many college students go through phases of stress or adjustment. Karen assumed that all this was Bryce dealing with school stress, relationship issues, the normal challenges of being 19 and away from home. She had no idea that within weeks, Bryce would disappear under circumstances so bizarre that a decade later, nobody would have answers. By late August 2013, Bryce was 19 years old. He was preparing to start his sophomore year at Sierra College. Classes were set to begin in early September. On the surface, everything appeared normal. But something was happening to Bryce that he wasn't telling anyone about, something that would lead to his disappearance. To understand what happened to Bryce Laspiza, we need to examine the days before his disappearance, because there were warning signs, subtle at first, then increasingly concerning. Around the middle of August, Bryce's behavior began to change noticeably. His friends and roommate noticed. He was drinking more than usual. He seemed depressed or emotionally flat. He was sleeping odd hours. He was less interested in his usual activities. He seemed preoccupied or troubled by something. When friends asked what was wrong, Bryce would brush it off or give vague answers. He'd say he was fine, just stressed about school starting. Around this time, Bryce was in a relatively new relationship with a fellow student named Kim. They'd been dating for a few months. Kim later told investigators that in the weeks before Bryce disappeared, she noticed changes. Bryce seemed emotionally distant. He was using alcohol and possibly drugs more frequently. He talked about feeling anxious about the future. He seemed uncertain about school, about their relationship, about life in general. This wasn't unusual for a 19-year-old. Many young adults go through periods of uncertainty and anxiety. But combined with other behavioral changes, it suggested Bryce was struggling with something. Here's a crucial detail. In August 2013, Bryce had been prescribed Vyvanse, a stimulant medication typically used to treat ADHD. Exactly when he was prescribed this, and by whom, is unclear from available records. Some reports suggest a friend gave him some pills. Others suggest he got a prescription from a doctor. Vyvanse is generally safe when taken as prescribed, but it can have side effects, especially when combined with alcohol or other drugs. Taken in higher doses than prescribed. Taken by someone without ADHD. Stopped abruptly after regular use. This medication will become very important to understanding what happened to Bryce. On August 27th or 28th, accounts vary slightly. Bryce and Kim broke up. The breakup wasn't dramatic or hostile. It was more of a mutual agreement that things weren't working. But breakups can be emotionally difficult, especially for someone already struggling. This event seems to have been a trigger for what happened next. On the morning of August 28, 2013, Bryce called his mother, Karen. She was at home in Laguna Niguel, California. The family had moved from Illinois to California in 2012 to be closer to Bryce. During this call, Karen noticed something was off. Bryce's speech seemed slow and slurred. He wasn't making complete sense. He seemed confused or disoriented. He told her he'd broken up with Kim. He said he wanted to come home. Karen was concerned. This didn't sound like her son. She asked if he was okay, if he'd been drinking. Bryce admitted he'd been drinking and had taken Vyvanse. Karen told Bryce he shouldn't drive if he'd been drinking. They talked for a while. Bryce said he wanted to see her and his stepfather, Mike. He said he'd drive down to their house, about a 6-hour drive from Rockland to Laguna Niguel. Karen was worried, but also somewhat relieved. If Bryce was coming home, she could figure out what was going on and help him. Bryce told Karen he would. 1. Get some rest first. 2. Sober up. 3. Pack some things. 4. Start driving to Laguna Niguel later that day or evening. 5. Call her when he left, and keep her updated during the drive. Karen agreed this was the best plan. She told Bryce to be safe, to drive carefully, and to call her frequently during the trip. They said goodbye. Karen felt uneasy but tried to stay calm. She waited for Bryce to call and say he was leaving. Hours passed. Karen didn't hear from Bryce. She texted him asking when he was planning to leave. No response. She called him. No answer. More hours passed. By evening, Karen was getting worried. Why wasn't Bryce responding? Finally, around 11 p.m., Bryce called Karen. He said he was leaving Rockland now and starting the drive to Laguna Niguel. Karen was relieved, but also concerned. 11 p.m. was late to start a 6-hour drive. But Bryce assured her he was fine. He was sober now, and he'd drive safely. Karen told him to call her periodically during the drive, so she'd know he was okay. Bryce agreed, and so began one of the strangest 24 hours in any missing persons case. What happened over the next 24 hours is documented through phone records, surveillance footage, GPS data, and witness statements. And yet, despite knowing almost minute by minute where Bryce was, we still don't understand why he was acting so strangely. Bryce left Rockland around 11 p.m. in his 2003 Toyota Highlander SUV. The drive from Rockland to Laguna Niguel typically takes about 6 hours via Interstate 5. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Bryce was making steady progress south on I-5. He called Karen a couple of times to check in. His speech still seemed a bit off, but he was coherent. He was driving at normal speeds. Karen stayed awake, waiting for updates. She was tracking his progress and calculating when he'd arrive, probably around 5 o'clock or 6 a.m. Around 2 a.m., Bryce stopped at a rest area near Buttonwillow, California. This is roughly the halfway point of his journey, about 3 hours from where he started, 3 hours from home. Bryce called Karen from the rest stop. During this call, he told her he was tired and thinking about sleeping in his car for a while. Karen urged him to just finish the drive. He was halfway there. Bryce seemed hesitant, but eventually said okay. He'd keep driving. His speech still seemed odd, slow, maybe slurred. Karen thought maybe Bryce was just exhausted. She told him if he was too tired, he should sleep, but if he could make it home, that would be better so she could see him. Bryce said he'd continue driving. Surveillance cameras at the rest stop show Bryce getting back in his SUV and leaving around 2:15 a.m. He heads south on I-5, continuing toward home. Everything seems fine. He's moving the right direction. He should be home in 3 hours. Around 3 a.m., something strange happens. According to phone records and GPS data, Bryce's location stops progressing south. Instead, his phone stays in basically the same location for hours. Where is he? Near Castaic Lake, California, about 30 miles north of his parents' house in Laguna Niguel. He's so close to home, just 30 to 45 minutes away. But Bryce doesn't continue. He stays in the Castaic area. Based on later investigation and surveillance footage, here's what investigators believe Bryce was doing between 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. Bryce was driving in circles. Literally, he was driving around a small area near Castaic Lake, just a few miles of road, over and over and over. He'd drive one direction, turn around, drive back, turn around, drive again. Why? Nobody knows. As morning arrived and Karen still hadn't heard from Bryce, she started calling him repeatedly. Sometimes he'd answer, sometimes he wouldn't. When he did answer, he'd say he was almost there, or he'd say he was stopping for gas, or he'd say he'd be there soon. His answers were vague and confusing. Karen was getting increasingly worried. She started tracking Bryce's location using GPS. That's when she realized Bryce wasn't moving. He'd been in the same general area for hours. Karen called the California Highway Patrol and explained the situation. Her 19-year-old son had been driving to see her. He'd been acting strangely. He'd been in the same area for hours, driving in circles. She was worried something was wrong. Could they send an officer to check on him? CHP said they'd send someone to look for Bryce's vehicle. A CHP officer located Bryce's Toyota Highlander parked at a rest stop near Castaic. The officer approached Bryce and talked to him. According to the officer's report, Bryce seemed fine, just tired. He said he'd been resting because he was too tired to drive. He said he was planning to continue to his parents' house soon. He wasn't showing obvious signs of intoxication or mental health crisis. The officer had no legal grounds to detain him. The officer called Karen and told her Bryce seemed okay, just tired. The officer suggested Bryce get some rest and then continue his journey. Karen asked if the officer could follow Bryce or escort him home. The officer explained they couldn't do that unless Bryce was a danger to himself or others, which he didn't appear to be. The officer left. Bryce remained at the rest stop. After the police contact, Bryce started driving again. But he didn't drive toward his parents' house, which was now only 30 minutes away. Instead, he continued driving in circles around the same area. Surveillance cameras and later GPS data show Bryce's SUV driving back and forth on the same stretch of road repeatedly. He'd drive to one spot, stop for a while, drive back, stop, drive again. Karen was now seriously alarmed. She called Bryce repeatedly. Sometimes he'd answer and say he was coming. Then he wouldn't move. She'd call again. He'd answer and say he'd just stopped for gas or food, but he still wouldn't move toward home. Karen called CHP again around 11 a.m., explaining that Bryce was still in the same area, still not coming home, still acting strangely. Could they please check on him again? Another CHP officer located Bryce, this time at a gas station near Castaic Lake. Again, the officer talked to Bryce. This officer later reported, Bryce again seemed tired but otherwise okay. Bryce said he was going to his parents' house. The officer noted Bryce's speech was a bit slow, but attributed it to exhaustion. Again, no legal grounds for detention. The officer left. Bryce stayed at the gas station. Around 2 p.m., Bryce called Karen. This conversation was disturbing. Bryce told Karen he was at a gas station. She asked him to just please finish the drive. He was so close. Bryce said something that chilled Karen. I just want you to know I love you, Mom. His tone was final, like a goodbye. Karen asked what he meant. Was he okay? Bryce said he was fine. He'd see her soon. Then he hung up. Karen was now terrified. That call didn't sound right at all. Karen called CHP a third time. She explained. Her son had been in the same area for 12-plus hours. He'd had 2 police welfare checks. He was clearly not okay, despite seeming fine to officers. His behavior was completely out of character. She was afraid he was going to hurt himself. Please, could they do something? CHP said they'd have another unit check on Bryce. A witness later reported seeing Bryce's SUV parked at a small roadside area near Castaic Lake around 3:30 to 4 p.m. The vehicle was just sitting there with Bryce inside. As evening approached on August 29th, Bryce was still in the Castaic area. He'd now been there for over 12 hours. He was less than 30 miles from home, but he wouldn't complete the drive. Karen and Mike stayed up all night, calling Bryce, tracking his GPS, praying he was okay. At approximately 5:30 a.m. on August 30th, 2013, a vehicle, later identified as Bryce's Toyota Highlander, crashed off a road near Castaic Lake. The SUV went down a steep embankment, rolling multiple times, and came to rest at the bottom of a 25-foot drop. And that's where our story takes its most disturbing turn. The crash of Bryce's SUV near Castaic Lake is both the most documented part of this case and the most mysterious. We know what happened to the vehicle. We have no idea what happened to Bryce. The crash occurred on a road near Castaic Lake in Los Angeles County, California. Specifically, it was on a road that runs alongside the lake, a winding, somewhat isolated road with steep embankments. This was in the same general area where Bryce had been driving in circles for the previous 18-plus hours. So he was familiar with this stretch of road. He'd driven it multiple times over the past day. When a vehicle was discovered at approximately 5:30 a.m. on August 30th, here's what investigators found. The vehicle, Bryce's 2003 Toyota Highlander SUV. It had gone off the road and rolled down a steep embankment. The vehicle dropped approximately 25 feet. It landed on its wheels at the bottom. The front windshield was shattered. The driver's side window was broken. The rear window was broken. There was significant damage to the body of the vehicle. But structurally, the SUV was relatively intact. The interior, the driver's seat showed evidence someone had been sitting there during the crash. Blood was found on the passenger side headrest. Blood was found on the passenger seat. Bryce's wallet was in the vehicle. His cell phone was in the vehicle. His laptop computer was in the vehicle. A container with what appeared to be crushed pills, later identified as Vivance, was found. There were bottles of alcohol in the vehicle. What was missing? Bryce's keys to the vehicle. Any clear indication of where Bryce went after the crash? The blood. The blood found in the vehicle is a crucial piece of evidence. Forensic analysis determined the blood was on the passenger side of the vehicle. The amount of blood suggested an injury, but not necessarily life-threatening. The blood pattern suggested head trauma, possibly from hitting the headrest during the crash. DNA confirmed the blood was Bryce's. This tells us Bryce was in the vehicle during the crash and sustained some injury. But the injury didn't appear severe enough to prevent him from leaving the vehicle. How did the crash happen? Accident reconstruction specialists analyzed the scene. Their conclusions: 1. The vehicle left the road at a specific point, where the embankment drops steeply. 2. Speed was a factor. The vehicle was traveling fast enough to become airborne briefly. 3. There were no skid marks, suggesting Bryce didn't brake before leaving the road. 4. The trajectory suggests the vehicle was driven straight off the road, not that it drifted or swerved. This raises a troubling question. Was this an accident, or was it intentional? The lack of skid marks suggests Bryce either didn't see the edge of the road. Unlikely. It was daylight by 5:30 a.m., and he'd driven this road multiple times. Fell asleep at the wheel. Possible given his exhaustion. Deliberately drove off the road. Deeply concerning. Could someone survive this crash? Medical experts and crash investigators agreed. Yes, absolutely. While the crash was serious, it was survivable, especially with the airbags deploying. The injuries Bryce sustained, based on blood evidence, appear to be head trauma from hitting the headrest, possibly cuts from broken glass, possible bruising or contusions from the seatbelt. But none of these injuries would necessarily prevent Bryce from unbuckling his seatbelt, opening the door, or climbing out a broken window, walking away from the crash site. The crash was discovered around 5:30 to 6 a.m. when someone driving on a road noticed the damaged guardrail and looked over the edge, seeing the SUV below. That person called 911. Emergency responders arrived quickly. When they reached the vehicle and found it empty with blood inside, they immediately called for additional resources. Search and rescue teams, sheriff's deputies, helicopters, search dogs. The assumption was that Bryce was injured and had wandered away from the crash, possibly disoriented. Within hours of the crash being discovered, a massive search was underway. Teams searched the area around the crash site thoroughly. They looked in the brush, in ravines near the lake. They called Bryce's name. They looked for blood trails or signs of someone injured walking. Dive teams searched the lake, concerned Bryce might have walked to the water and drowned. Boats searched the surface. Sonar was used to scan underwater. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the area. Ground teams searched in expanding circles from the crash site. ATVs covered larger areas of rough terrain. Tracking dogs were brought in and given Bryce's scent from items in his vehicle. The dogs tracked a scent from the vehicle, followed it about 100 yards to a nearby truck stop/rest area, then lost the scent completely. This suggested Bryce walked from the crash site to the truck stop area and then possibly got into another vehicle, which would end the scent trail. Despite intensive searching throughout August 30th, no sign of Bryce was found. No clothing, no blood trail, no sightings, no body, nothing. It was as if Bryce had vanished into thin air. When Karen and Mike Laspiza learned about the crash, they immediately drove to Castaic. They arrived to find their son's crashed SUV, but no son. Karen later described this as the most horrifying moment of her life, seeing Bryce's vehicle destroyed, seeing blood, and knowing he was out there somewhere, possibly injured, but not knowing where. Even in those first hours, investigators were asking troubling questions. 1. Why did Bryce crash? Accident or intentional? 2. How badly was he injured? 3. Where did he go after the crash? 4. Did someone pick him up? 5. Was he coherent enough to walk away deliberately? 6. Was he suffering from a head injury that made him disoriented? 7. Why did the scent trail end at the truck stop? None of these questions have ever been definitively answered. After Bryce's SUV was found crashed and empty on August 30th, 2013, one of the most intensive missing persons searches in California history began. Hundreds of people, thousands of man-hours, and advanced technology were deployed, and they found almost nothing. Day 1, August 30th. The search on the first day was massive. Personnel: Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department deputies, search and rescue teams from multiple counties, California Highway Patrol officers, local police departments, volunteer search teams. Over 200 people actively searching. Technology: helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanning from above. Drones, though less common in 2013, searching hard-to-reach areas. Tracking dogs following scent trails. Dive teams searching Castaic Lake. Sonar equipment scanning underwater. Ground-penetrating radar in some areas. The search area. The terrain around Castaic Lake is challenging. Steep hillsides and ravines. Dense brush and chaparral. Rocky outcroppings. The lake itself with many hidden coves. Abandoned structures and old mining areas. Miles and miles of wilderness. Searchers covered a 5-mile radius from the crash site initially. All accessible shoreline of Castaic Lake. Hiking trails in the area. Abandoned buildings and structures. Nearby highways and roads. What they found. On day 1, searchers found almost nothing. No additional blood trails. No clothing or personal items. No footprints beyond what tracking dogs followed. No signs Bryce had been injured and collapsed. No body. The only significant finding was what the tracking dogs revealed. Bryce's scent led from the crash site to a truck stop area about 100 yards away, then disappeared completely. Days 2 to 7. The search continued for a full week. Each day, teams would start at first light. Search new areas in an expanding radius. Research areas already covered. Check and double-check anywhere someone could hide or fall. Call Bryce's name constantly. Look for any sign. A piece of clothing, a footprint, anything. Karen and Mike were there every day, helping coordinate, talking to searchers, desperately hoping for any news. Several factors made the search difficult. 1. The heat. August in Southern California is brutally hot. Temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If Bryce was injured and exposed, time was critical. 2. The terrain. The area has countless places where someone could fall and be hidden. Ravines, thick brush, rocky areas. 3. The lake. Castaic Lake is large and deep. If Bryce had gone into the water, finding him would be extremely difficult. 4. The time factor. With each passing day, evidence deteriorates. Scents fade. Tracks are covered. The trail gets colder. 5. The vastness. There are thousands of acres of wilderness. Even with 200 people, covering everything is nearly impossible. While searches continued, detectives were investigating other aspects. Bryce's background. Interviewing everyone who knew Bryce. His roommate, his ex-girlfriend Kim, his friends, his professors and classmates. Anyone who'd seen or talked to him in the days before. His mental state. Was Bryce suicidal? Most people said no. He'd never expressed such thoughts. Was he depressed? Yes, he'd seemed down recently. Was he using drugs? He'd been drinking and taking Vyvanse, but was that unusual for him? The Vyvanse question. Investigators focused heavily on the Vyvanse found in Bryce's vehicle. The pills were crushed, suggesting they'd been used recreationally. Crushed pills can be snorted or dissolved. Vyvanse is a stimulant that can cause psychological effects, especially when misused. Side effects can include paranoia, anxiety, confusion, erratic behavior. Mixing Vyvanse with alcohol, which Bryce had been doing, can be dangerous. Stopping suddenly after regular use can cause depression and other withdrawal symptoms. Could Vyvanse explain Bryce's strange behavior? Possibly, but it doesn't fully explain everything. The phone records. Bryce's phone records were examined in detail. His last call was to Karen around 2 p.m. on August 29th. After that, his phone was never used again. The phone was found in the crashed vehicle. There were no texts, no calls, no data usage after 2 p.m. His social media accounts were never accessed again. The surveillance footage. Investigators collected surveillance footage from gas stations where Bryce stopped, the rest area where police contacted him, the truck stop where his scent trail ended. The footage confirmed Bryce's timeline, but didn't reveal anything about where he went after the crash. The truck stop theory. The fact that Bryce's scent led to the truck stop raised an important question. Did someone pick him up? Investigators looked into this. They reviewed security footage from the truck stop, if available. They asked truckers if anyone had picked up a hitchhiker. They checked if any vehicles had stopped in that area around the time of the crash. They never found evidence of anyone giving Bryce a ride. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. It's possible someone picked up Bryce and either doesn't know he's a missing person, hasn't come forward for other reasons. Something happened that prevented them from reporting it. Week 2 and beyond. After the first week of intensive searching, the effort had to be scaled back. Volunteers returned to their normal lives. Fewer deputies could be dedicated to searching. The case transitioned from active search to investigation. Searches continued, but less frequently. Karen and Mike refused to give up. They organized their own search parties, printed and distributed thousands of flyers, created social media pages, appeared on local news, reached out to every resource they could find. The theories develop. As weeks passed without finding Bryce, investigators and family began developing theories about what happened. Each theory had to explain. 1. Why Bryce drove in circles for 12-plus hours. 2. Why he crashed. 3. Where he went after the crash. 4. Why no trace of him has been found. Let's examine each major theory in detail. Over the past decade, multiple theories have emerged about what happened to Bryce Laspiza after his SUV crashed near Castaic Lake. Let's examine each one carefully. Theory number 1. Bryce died by suicide. This is a difficult theory to discuss, but it's one that investigators and family have had to consider. The scenario. Bryce was experiencing a mental health crisis in the days before his disappearance. The combination of depression, relationship stress, academic pressure, substance use, and possibly adverse effect from Vyvanse led to suicidal thoughts. The driving in circles represented Bryce's internal struggle, wanting to go home to his parents, but also feeling he couldn't face them or his problems. The crash may have been a suicide attempt, but Bryce survived with injuries. After the crash, disoriented and still in crisis, Bryce walked away and completed suicide somewhere in the vast wilderness where his body hasn't been found. Evidence supporting this. Bryce's behavior in the days before suggested severe depression. The goodbye tone of his last phone call to Karen. I just want you to know I love you. The driving in circles could represent indecision about ending his life. The crash with no skid marks suggests it may have been intentional. His body not being found is consistent with suicide in wilderness areas. Bodies can be very difficult to locate. Evidence against this. Bryce never expressed suicidal thoughts to anyone. He was making plans for the upcoming school year. He called his mom and said he wanted to come home. That suggests he wanted help. The scent trail ending at the truck stop doesn't fit suicide in the wilderness. His keys were missing from the vehicle. Why take keys if planning suicide? Expert opinion. Mental health professionals note that suicide attempts can be impulsive and don't always have obvious warning signs. The combination of substances, depression, and youth make this a possibility. Probability. Medium cannot be ruled out, but doesn't explain all evidence. Theory number 2. Bryce had a head injury and became disoriented. The scenario. The crash caused a head injury more severe than the blood evidence suggests. Bryce was disoriented, confused, possibly suffering from a concussion or traumatic brain injury. In this confused state, he wandered away from the crash site. He may have fallen into a ravine or hidden area, suffered exposure, and collapsed in a location that hasn't been found. Become further injured in his confused wandering. Been unable to call for help due to confusion. His body is somewhere in the vast wilderness, in a location searchers haven't found despite extensive efforts. Evidence supporting this. Blood in the vehicle confirms head trauma. Head injuries can cause confusion, memory loss, and poor decision-making. Would explain why Bryce walked away instead of staying with his vehicle. Would explain seemingly irrational behavior. Bodies in wilderness can remain hidden for years or decades. Evidence against this. The amount of blood didn't suggest severe trauma. Tracking dogs should have found him if he wandered aimlessly. The scent trail going specifically to the truck stop suggests purposeful movement, not confused wandering. Even with a head injury, instinct is usually to stay near the crash site or seek help. Search expert opinion. If Bryce had collapsed in the immediate search area, the extensive first-week search should have found him. If he wandered farther, he would have had to cover significant distance while injured. Probability. Low-medium. Possible, but would require several things to align. Theory number 3. Bryce left voluntarily to start a new life. The scenario. Bryce was overwhelmed by life. School stress, relationship problems, the pressure of his parents' expectations. The bizarre behavior was actually planned, a way to stage his disappearance. After the crash, Bryce either had someone pick him up, explaining the scent trail to truck stop, hitchhiked away, had secretly planned this and had resources hidden. He's alive somewhere, living under a different identity, having chosen to walk away from his old life. Evidence supporting this. Would explain why no body has been found. The keys being missing suggests he took them intentionally. The behavior could have been staged to create confusion. Young people do sometimes disappear voluntarily. Evidence against this. Bryce was very close to his parents. Abandoning them seems out of character. He had no money to start over. His wallet was in the vehicle. No activity on his identity, social security number, or financial accounts since 2013. In the digital age, living completely off-grid is extremely difficult. His parents describe him as loving and would never put them through this pain. This theory requires believing Bryce deliberately staged everything, which seems inconsistent with his personality. Probability, very low, doesn't fit Bryce's character or the evidence. Theory number 4. Bryce was picked up by someone with bad intentions. The scenario. After the crash, injured and disoriented, Bryce walked to the truck stop area. Someone stopped, perhaps offering help, and picked him up. This person either harmed Bryce intentionally, robbery, assault, or worse, was involved in something criminal, and Bryce became a victim, had an accident with Bryce in their vehicle, and hid the body to avoid responsibility. Evidence supporting this. The scent trail ending a truck stop suggests he got into a vehicle. Would explain complete disappearance. Predators do exist who take advantage of vulnerable people. Would explain why no trace has been found in the wilderness. Evidence against this. Bryce was 6 feet 2 inches and adult-sized. Not an easy victim. The truck stop would have had other people around, even early morning. No witnesses saw Bryce with anyone. No suspicious vehicles were identified despite investigation. Seems like significant bad luck for this to happen. Probability: low-medium, possible, but would require unfortunate timing. Theory number 5. Bryce is in Castaic Lake. The scenario: after the crash, Bryce, possibly injured, definitely disoriented, walked toward Castaic Lake. He either fell into the water accidentally, entered the water intentionally, drowned due to injury and exhaustion. His body remains in the lake, in a deep area or hidden location that dive teams haven't found. Evidence supporting this: the crash was very close to the lake. Bodies in water can be very difficult to find, especially in large lakes. Would explain why ground searches found nothing. Water often draws disoriented or suicidal individuals. Evidence against this: extensive underwater searches with sonar found nothing. The scent trail went toward the truck stop, not the lake. No evidence Bryce was near the water. Dive teams were very thorough. Probability: low-medium, dive teams were extensive, but lakes can hide bodies. Theory number 6. The drug psychosis theory. The scenario: the combination of Vyvanse misuse, alcohol, lack of sleep, and stress caused Bryce to experience drug-induced psychosis. His driving in circles, strange behavior, and eventual crash were all manifestations of this psychotic episode. After the crash, still in psychosis, Bryce experienced paranoia or delusions. He may have believed he needed to run and hide, experienced hallucinations that led him into dangerous terrain, been unable to think rationally about his survival, collapsed somewhere due to the combination of injury, exhaustion, and drugs. Evidence supporting this: would explain the bizarre, circling behavior, would explain refusing to go home despite being so close, would explain seeming fine to police but actually being in crisis. Stimulant psychosis is a real phenomenon. Would explain irrational decisions after the crash. Evidence against this: Bryce's conversations with police seemed relatively coherent. He was able to drive, though strangely, for many hours. This doesn't explain where his body is. Probability: medium, could explain behavior, but not the disappearance. Most law enforcement officials working this case believe the most likely scenario is some combination of theories. Bryce was experiencing a mental health crisis, possibly drug-influenced, possibly not. His erratic behavior was real, not staged. The crash may have been intentional or accidental. After the crash, Bryce either 1. Wandered into the wilderness in a confused state and died from exposure/injuries in a location that hasn't been found. 2. Took his own life in a remote area. 3. Entered Castaic Lake and drowned. The reason he hasn't been found is simply the vastness of the terrain and the difficulty of locating remains in wilderness areas. But even this consensus leaves questions unanswered, and it doesn't bring closure to Bryce's parents, who have spent a decade searching. Karen and Michael Laspiza have lived every parent's nightmare for over 10 years. Their only child vanished, and despite their tireless efforts, they have no answers. Let's examine their journey and their ongoing search for Bryce. Immediately after Bryce's disappearance, Karen and Mike threw everything into finding their son. Search efforts: they organized weekly search parties. Every weekend, volunteers would meet and search different areas. They brought in private search and rescue experts. They hired bloodhound trackers. They searched and searched and searched. Media campaign: they appeared on every local news station that would have them. They did interviews with newspapers. They reached out to national missing persons organizations. They created missing posters with Bryce's photo and distributed thousands. Financial cost: they spent their savings on private investigators. They paid for additional searches. They offered rewards for information. Karen quit her job to dedicate herself full-time to finding Bryce. Emotional toll: Karen later described the first year as a living hell. Not knowing was torture. Was Bryce alive? Dead? Suffering? Every phone call could be news. Every unidentified body found in California had to be checked. Birthdays and holidays were devastating. The community response. The response from the community was overwhelming. Hundreds of people volunteered to search. Local businesses donated supplies. Fundraisers were held to help with search costs. The Find Bryce Laspiza Facebook page gained thousands of followers. But as months passed without any developments, public attention began to fade. This is normal but heartbreaking for families. The world moves on, but for them, time stopped the day their loved one disappeared. 2014 to 2016, the long middle years. These years were characterized by continued searching. Though less frequent, searches continued. Anytime there was a possible sighting, they investigated. Anytime remains were found anywhere in California, they waited anxiously for identification. False hopes. Multiple times, people claimed to have seen Bryce. In Oregon, Nevada, even other states. Each time, Karen and Mike would investigate. Each time, it led nowhere. Each false hope was emotionally devastating. The waiting. Waiting for police to find something. Waiting for a break in the case. Waiting for Bryce to contact them. Waiting for closure that never came. The questions from others. Well-meaning people would ask, any news? People would suggest theories or places to search. Some people questioned if Karen and Mike were doing enough. Others suggested maybe they should move on. But how do you move on when your child is missing? When there's no body, no confirmation of death, just absence. 2017 to 2018, new technology, new hope. As technology advanced, Karen and Mike explored new options. DNA databases. They submitted Bryce's DNA to every database available. If unidentified remains were ever found, there could be a match. This gives hope, but also dread. They want answers, but they dread what those answers might be. Social media investigation. True crime communities online began examining Bryce's case. YouTube videos, podcasts, Reddit threads. This brought renewed attention, but also conspiracy theories, accusations, and speculation. Armchair detectives harassing people. Karen and Mike having to defend themselves against unfounded theories. Psychics and mediums. Desperate for any lead, Karen consulted with psychics. Some claimed to see where Bryce was. None of these leads resulted in finding Bryce. Karen later expressed regret about trusting some of these people who may have taken advantage of her desperation. 2019 to 2020, the remains that weren't Bryce. Several times over the years, human remains were discovered in California. Each time, there was the agonizing wait for identification. Each time, Karen and Mike prepared themselves for the worst. Each time, DNA testing revealed it wasn't Bryce. The relief that it wasn't him mixed with disappointment that they still had no answers. One particular incident in 2019 was especially difficult. Remains were found in an area not far from where Bryce disappeared. The timeline seemed to match. Physical characteristics were similar. For weeks, they waited for DNA results. When results came back negative, Karen described it as a cruel roller coaster. The pandemic years, 2020 to 2021. COVID-19 disrupted everything. Organized searches had to stop. Police resources were diverted. Karen and Mike were isolated with their grief. But online interest in Bryce's case exploded as people stuck at home consumed true crime content. 2022 to 2023, the 10th anniversary. August 30th, 2023, marked 10 years since Bryce disappeared. This milestone brought media attention. New articles were written. TV programs feature the case. Documentary producers expressed interest. Reflection. Karen gave heartbreaking interviews about a decade without her son. She talked about missing his entire 20s. He'd be 29 now. She talked about wondering who he would have become. She talked about the permanent state of limbo their lives are in. Renewed searches. Anniversary searches were organized. New areas were explored with updated technology. Ground-penetrating radar was used in some locations. Still, nothing was found. The emotional reality. In interviews, Karen has been remarkably open about what this decade has been like. The first few years, she truly believed Bryce would come home. She kept his room exactly as it was. She kept his phone number active in case he ever called. She investigated every possible sighting, no matter how unlikely. As years passed, hope became harder to maintain. The likelihood that Bryce is alive decreased. But without a body, she can't fully grieve. She's stuck between hope and grief, unable to fully experience either. The impact on their lives. This decade of searching has affected every aspect of Karen and Mike's lives. Financially, they've spent tens of thousands of dollars on searches, investigators, and travel. Karen's career was derailed. Their retirement savings were depleted. Emotionally, the constant stress and grief has taken a toll on their health. Their relationship has been strained, though they've stayed together. They've isolated from friends who don't understand. Every family gathering is missing the most important person. Physically, Karen has described stress-related health issues. The aging process accelerated by constant worry. Sleepless nights wondering where Bryce is. Despite the pain, Karen has found purpose. She advocates for other families of missing persons. She provides support to parents going through similar nightmares. She works to improve missing persons protocols. She keeps Bryce's case visible. As of 2024, Karen and Mike still live in California, though they've moved from Laguna Niguel. Still actively search when possible. Still update Bryce's social media pages. Still hope for answers, even if those answers are the worst ones. Karen has said, "I just want to know. I want to find him and bring him home. Whether he's alive or not, I need to know." This not knowing is the hardest thing any parent could experience. As Bryce Laspey's case enters its second decade, what's changed? What's the current status? And is there any hope for resolution? The investigation remains officially open, but with few active leads. What police are doing? The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department still lists Bryce as a missing person. They follow up on any credible tips that come in. They maintain Bryce's DNA in databases. But without new evidence, there's little active investigation. Recent searches, periodic searches are still conducted, especially around anniversaries. New technology, like advanced drones and improved imaging, is sometimes used. Specific areas of interest are researched when technology improves. But the vast majority of the search area has been covered multiple times. The online community. TikTok, YouTube, and Reddit communities continue analyzing the case. New people discover Bryce's story regularly. Some online investigators have developed detailed theories. But this has also led to harassment of people tangentially involved. What we know for certain. After 11 years, here are the undisputed facts. 1. Bryce Laspey left Rocklin, California on August 28, 2013, intending to drive to his parents' house. 2. He spent approximately 12-plus hours driving in circles near Castaic Lake. 3. Police made welfare checks and found him seemingly okay, but acting strangely. 4. His SUV crashed on August 30, 2013, around 5:30 a.m. 5. Blood found in the vehicle confirmed he was injured. 6. Bryce was not at the crash site when it was discovered. 7. His scent trail led to a nearby truck stop and then vanished. 8. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Bryce has been found. What remains unknown? Why was Bryce driving in circles? What was his mental state? Was the crash accidental or intentional? Where did he go after the crash? Is he alive or deceased? If deceased, where are his remains? Over the years, investigators have ruled out several theories. Crossmark Bryce is living voluntarily under a new identity, no activity on his identity. Crossmark Bryce was taken across international borders, no evidence. Crossmark the crash was staged by someone else. Forensic evidence confirms Bryce was driving. Crossmark Bryce is being held captive, extremely unlikely after 11 years. Theories that remain possible. Bryce died by suicide in a remote location. Bryce died from injuries/exposure after the crash. Bryce is in Castaic Lake. Bryce was picked up by someone and met with foul play. Bryce had a severe mental health episode and is deceased in an unfound location. Several things could finally provide answers. 1. Someone coming forward. If someone picked up Bryce, if someone saw something, if anyone has information. 2. Finding remains. Hikers, construction, development. Remains are sometimes found years or decades later. 3. Technology advances. New search technology, new imaging techniques, or new forensic methods. 4. Deathbed confessions. If anyone was involved in harming Bryce, they may confess eventually. 5. Random discovery. Sometimes remains are found by accident in areas that have been searched before. A message from Karen. In recent interviews, Karen has made direct appeals. If anyone knows anything at all, please come forward. Even if you think it's not important, even if you're scared, please tell someone. We need to find Bryce. We need to bring him home. If you gave someone a ride that day, if you saw something, if you know what happened, please help us. You can remain anonymous. Just please help us find our son. If you were in the Castaic Lake area on August 29th to 30th, 2013, if you saw Bryce's red Toyota Highlander, if you saw a young man walking near the truck stop, if you have any information at all, please contact the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department at 323-890-5500. You can remain anonymous. Even the smallest detail could be the piece that finally solves this mystery. The Bryce Laspisa case is a reminder of how someone can vanish even when we have so much information. We have GPS data, we have witness statements, we have a documented timeline. And yet, Bryce disappeared so completely that 11 years of searching has found nothing. It's a case that shows how vast and unforgiving the California wilderness can be. How easy it is for someone to disappear. How many places exist where remains might never be found? But it's also a case about a family's love and determination. Karen and Mike have never stopped searching. They've never given up hope. They've turned their tragedy into advocacy for other families. Bryce was 19 years old when he disappeared. He'd be 30 now. A decade of his life has passed. A decade of his parents' lives has been consumed by searching for him. They deserve answers. Bryce deserves to be found. And somewhere, there's information that could solve this mystery. What do you think happened to Bryce Laspisa? Do you believe he's in the wilderness waiting to be found? Do you think he's in Castaic Lake? Do you think someone picked him up? Or do you have another theory? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Remember that Bryce's family sometimes reads these discussions, so please be thoughtful and kind. If this investigation resonated with you, please subscribe to the Vanish Files. We tell the stories of people who deserve to be remembered, cases that remain unsolved, and families who refuse to give up. Like this video to help keep Bryce's case visible. Share it with anyone who might have information. You never know who might see it and remember something crucial. In our next video, we'll investigate another disappearance that defies all logic and leaves more questions than answers. Until then, remember that behind every unsolved mystery is a real person, a real family, real love, and real pain. This has been the Vanish Files. Thank you for helping us keep Bryce Laspisa's memory alive.